Today, I want to talk about how the folks over at the Young Turks have found a scapegoat for inflation. But before we get into that video, I actually want to start with our good friend Robert Reich, or as I like to call him, Robespierre Reich. Because recently, as you can see, just a few days ago, February 28th, he put up a new video titled "The Hidden Link Between Corporate Greed and Inflation." And I decided to look back through his catalog, his library of videos, because I was thinking, there has to be some old videos of Robert Reich cheerleading, advocating for more government spending, more relief spending for COVID relief, trillions of dollars in new spending. There has to be some video footage of him, cheering that on. And as it turns out, there is a video from last July of 2021, over 100,000 views on YouTube. Let's see what Robert Reich had to say about inflation back in July, just 7 months ago.
We definitely should not be worried about inflation.
Yeah, whoa, we should not be worried about inflation, you guys.
That is a bogeyman.
It's a bogeyman.
That's being used by conservatives and corporations who don't want the government to spend money,
It's been used by conservatives and corporations who don't want the government to spend money or raise their taxes.
are worried about their taxes possibly going up. Don't worry about inflation.
Yeah, guys, don't worry about inflation. It's just a boogeyman. But now, about 7 months later, now we're late February 28th. Now this is what Robert Reich is saying about inflation.
Inflation. Everybody's talking about it, but ignoring one of its biggest causes, corporate concentration.
Yeah, it's corporate concentration. How corporate greed drives inflation.
Now, prices are undeniably rising.
Undeniably. Oh, that's funny, because I remember someone telling me back in July to not worry about it.
In response, the Fed is about to slow the economy, even though we're still at least 4 million jobs short.
You know what? Good for him. At least he admits here that the Fed has a role in slowing down the economy so that we cannot blame it on unfettered capitalism. Woo! But yeah, so here he admits that the Fed has a role in, slowing things down.
Short of where we were before the pandemic, and millions of American workers won't get the raises they deserve. Republicans haven't wasted any time hammering Biden and Democratic lawmakers about inflation.
Skyrocketing inflation.
But don't fall for their fear-mongering.
Yeah, don't fall for their fear-mongering.
Everybody's ignoring
Fall for my fear-mongering.
the deeper structural reason for price increases. The
By mine, I mean Robert Reich's.
concentration of the American economy into the hands of a very few corporate giants with the power to raise prices. If the market were actually competitive, corporations would keep their prices as low as possible as they competed for customers. Even if some of their costs increased, they would do everything they could to avoid passing those costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices, for fear of losing business to competitors. But that's the opposite of what we're seeing. Corporations are raising prices even as they...
Yeah, suddenly within the last 2 years, we've had a lot more market consolidation. That's the problem.
rake in record profits.
Record profits! Yeah, and this is what the corporations, what the corporate execs do when they're not exploiting your labor. When they're not price gouging you, they're just swimming around in a bunch of gold. Yeah. So now listen to this. So does any of this add up? The fact that back in July, he was saying that corporations were fear-mongering about inflation. They were all worried about government spending and inflation that would ensue. But now these same corporations, they're secretly excited about inflation because then they have an excuse to jack up prices. I mean, you would think by this logic that the corporations, they wouldn't have fear-mongered back in July. They would have been like, oh my God, this is awesome. Now we have an excuse to jack up prices. Do you guys need any more proof that Robert Reich is a total clown show?
Profit margins hit record highs last year.
Record high profit margins.
You see, these corporations have so much market power, they can raise prices with impunity. So the underlying problem isn't inflation per se, it's lack of competition. Corporations are using the excuse of inflation.
Yeah, it's an excuse
to raise prices and make
Before they were scared, but now they're like, oh man, who knew? Now we have an excuse to raise prices.
Their profits. Take the energy sector.
Yeah, the energy sector.
Only a few entities have access to the land and pipelines that control the oil and gas powering most.
Now, Robert, he's not entirely wrong here. It is true. Yeah, we have a lack of competition, lack of exploiting resources in energy. I wonder why that is. Could it be, some of Robert Reich's heroes, particularly in the Democrat Party? His political heroes have done their best to stop pipeline projects, to not drill, to not frack more, to not produce fossil fuels. You got to wonder if someone like Robert Reich was maybe cheering this on. This from a video in 2020, the solutions to climate change that no one is talking about.
$78 billion through 2050. In other words, a Green New Deal could turn the climate crisis into an opportunity, one that both addresses the climate emergency and creates a fairer and more equitable society. Second, stop dirty energy.
Yeah, stop dirty energy, you guys.
A massive investment in renewable energy jobs isn't enough to combat the climate crisis.
Yeah, the solar panels, the wind turbines, they're not enough.
If we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we must tackle the problem at its source. Stop digging up and burning more oil, gas, and coal.
And now it's a few years later, and now that Robert Reich's political heroes are in power, now we're suddenly seeing price increases. It sounds like this is the world that you wanted, Robert. Less oil, less fossil fuels. Whoops, the prices went up.
The world. They took a hit during the pandemic. As most people stayed home. But they are more than making up for it now. Limiting supply and ratcheting up prices.
Yeah, he's one to accuse. I mean, isn't this good? Limiting supply. I mean, he was begging for this to happen 2 years ago. And now he's mad that prices are going up as a result of lack of supply.
Chevron, Exxon have doubled their profits.
They've doubled their profits. Are we sure about this? If you look at some of these charts, this is according to Macro Trends, going to be relying on this a lot. If you look at Exxon's net income charts, look at these charts. Like, yeah, maybe you could say that they may have doubled their profits over the last year or so, but you have to contextualize, as Robert said, they took a hit during the pandemic. And as you can see, according to this chart in 2020, they were looks like they were operating at a loss. So yeah, you could say technically they have doubled their profits. It looks like the same is true with Chevron. I mean, what was it? Right here in 2020, they had a 250% decline from 2019. So maybe you could say they've doubled their profits since, but they're leaving out the context that they had a pretty bad year, as a lot of companies did in 2020. Similar story with Chevron in 2020. They had a 289% decline in net income, and now they're back up. So yeah, you could say that they've doubled their profits, but I would say that's a pretty misleading way to frame it. Liz?
This isn't about inflation. This is about price gouging.
Yeah.
Look at consumer goods. In April 2021, Procter & Gamble raised prices on staples like diapers and toilet paper, citing increased costs in raw materials and transportation. But P&G has been making huge profits. After some of its price increases went into effect, it reported an almost 25% profit margin.
Yeah, wow. So you're going to notice how he casually flips from different measurements to assess profits and whatnot. You're going to see this with TYT too.
Looking to buy
right now, he's saying profit margins.
Your diapers elsewhere? Well, good luck. The market is dominated by P&G and Kimberly-Clark.
P&G and Kimberly-Clark. So let's take a look at P&G and Kimberly-Clark's charts. This is Procter & Gamble. If you look at their net income, and for those who don't know, I should have mentioned net income can be defined as a company's net profit or loss after all revenues, income items, and expenses have been accounted for. If you look at their net income, you don't really see like a significant increase in overall profits over the last few years. You want to talk about record profits? It looks like their record profit was probably 2016. But you would expect to see like in 2022, like a sharp increase in profits, and we're not seeing it. But then you go to Kimberly-Clark, his whole thing is, oh, they raise prices too. So presumably Kimberly-Clark, they're probably crushing it, right? Well, according to Kimberly-Clark's net income statistics, it looks like they were actually down in 2021 despite the price increases. Interesting that Robert Reich does not care to mention those statistics in his analysis.
Which not entirely coincidentally raised its prices at the same time.
Yeah, where are their record profit increases?
Another example. In April 2021, PepsiCo raised prices, blaming...
They raised PepsiCo. I guess soda is a basic human right now.
Higher costs for ingredients, freight, and labor.
Now, as an aside, as someone who drinks a lot of soda, if you guys have not noticed, I actually noticed shortages of diet, sugar-free soda, whatever they're calling it these days. I noticed shortages at times, and I remember looking into it, and it turned out, because you're going to see this with Robert Reich and TYT, oh, they're just blaming it on supply chain complications. No, it's just corporate greed. But I remember looking into it. I'm like, why? Like, there was one time I went into 4 different grocery stores and I could not find any 12 packs, 24 packs, or whatever of Diet Coke, Diet Mountain Dew, any of it. And when I looked into it, I found out that a reason for that was because the United States, or I should say companies in the United States, they rely heavily on imports for things like artificial sweeteners, which are used in diet sodas. So I tend to believe that maybe there are some supply chain complications when it comes to soda. But what's Robert's reasoning for this?
Go raise prices, blaming higher costs for ingredients, freight, and labor. It then recorded $3 billion in operating profits through September.
$3 billion in operating profits through September. So he went from profit margins, now he's using operating profits, which for those who don't know, operating income can be defined as income after operating expenses have been deducted and before interest payments and taxes have been deducted. And this kind of lines up because he said it was what, $3 billion in the second quarter of 2021 with Pepsi. And yeah, you see they have $3 billion, but that's before taxes and interest payments are deducted. If you look at net income after the deduction, you don't really notice, again, a significant increase in PepsiCo's overall profits. Definitely not seeing record profits because, again, if you look at 2018, that looks like probably their best year. That was pre-pandemic. But what's the deal here, Robert?
How did it get away with this without losing customers? Pepsi has only one major competitor, Coca-Cola, which promptly raised its own prices.
Yeah, Coca-Cola raised prices. How's that working out?
Coca-Cola recorded $10 billion in revenues.
You guys noticing this? He went from profit margins to operating profits. Now he's using revenue numbers. And I think a reason, you're going to see Cenk Uygur and John, what's his face? Was it his name? No, David Schuster. That's who it was. And you're going to see Cenk Uygur and David Schuster play this game too, where they casually switch from different measurements, especially with revenues, because that's not the same as profits. And I think a reason why they do this is because they try to overwhelm the viewer with large numbers without showing the full context, so they can say, oh my God, yeah, they're making these crazy revenues. Whoa, and they claim that they need to raise prices. What's going on? Well, if you actually look, first off, that's not that's revenue. It's not profit. It's not record profit. If we look at Coca-Cola's net income over the years, again, you don't notice a significant increase in profit. In fact, you want to again talk about record profits. It looks like they had better years in 2016 and 2010. But you don't let that distract you from Robert Reich just throwing a large, $10 billion, holy shit.
In the third quarter of 2021, up 16% from the previous year.
Oh yeah, up 16% too. Again, you have to add. So it's up 16% from 2020. I mean, we're talking profits here. 2020 was Coca-Cola experienced a 13% decline in profits. This is another thing. Again, they a lot of these companies, they took a hit in 2020 because of lockdowns and the pandemic and all that stuff. And a lot of them have since come back. But the Robert Reiches, the Cenk Uygurs, they're going to make it sound like that the comeback, it's not them bouncing back from rock bottom from a difficult year. No, it's because they jacked up prices.
Food prices are soaring, but half of that is from meat, which costs 15% more than last year. There are only 4 major meat processing companies in America, which are all raising their prices and enjoying record profits.
Now, I went really in depth when I did my Kyle Kulinski Secular Talk Finds a Scapegoat for Inflation. I go really in depth on the whole talking point about the meat industry. Basically, it's a talking point about how 4 companies buy roughly 80% of the steers and heifers for slaughter. This is based on statistics from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And this has been the case since roughly 2008, 2009. This is a point that Robert Reich himself brought up in a video in 2018. And you got to wonder, if these 4 companies had that much market control and could have raised prices with impunity, why did they suddenly wait until 2020, 2021, 2022 to jack up prices?
Get the picture? The underlying problem is not inflation, it's corporate power.
Yeah.
Since the 1980s, when the U.S. government all but abandoned antitrust enforcement,
yeah, tell that to Bill Gates.
All American industries have become more concentrated. Most are now dominated by a handful of corporations that coordinate prices and production. This is true of banks, broadband, pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, and more on that point. If you go to Exxon, because you hear this a lot, they're just jacking up prices. And you notice Exxon and Chevron, and even Coca-Cola, they were all doing much better back in between 2010, 2015. And then their profits just kind of drop off a bit for a few years, and then they bounce back up within the last 2 years. Same with Chevron to a certain extent. So, what was going on these years? Did all these companies, did they not know that they could raise prices, or were they just being were they just being generous and deciding to not squeeze customers?
Companies, airlines, meat packers, and yes, soda. Corporations in all these industries and more could easily absorb higher costs.
Easily.
Including long overdue wage increases without passing them on to consumers in the form of higher prices. But they aren't. Instead,
yeah. Now, what's interesting about that, so Robert Reich talking about how, oh yeah, they can raise wages without passing that cost on to the consumers. I find this amusing because if you remember some of Robert Reich's videos on the minimum wage, raising it to $15 an hour, I guess I should add context because this was in a recent video I did where Robert Reich, he was all mad at Starbucks for raising prices, blaming it on labor costs. So Starbucks, they raise their wages to above $15 an hour, which is what Robert Reich has been advocating for years. But they said, look, we're gonna have to raise prices to meet the labor costs. And Robert Reich, you know, he was saying back then, oh my God, this is going to be great.
They turn around and spend it. Which
they spend it.
Creates demand and jobs for all of us.
Yeah, it's going to be great for the economy. He said this in a Now This video back in 2019.
5, they say that raising the minimum wage would generate inflation and erase any gains from the increase. No. Past increases in the minimum wage have not led to significant increases in inflation. There's no inflation. Look for it. You can't find it. Raising the minimum wage would be good for workers, good for...
Yeah, and so when companies do that and they raise prices, then Robert Reich, he gets all mad. It's like, I thought it would be great for the economy. What are you so upset about? Starbucks raising their wages. Also, there was another point. Where is it?
Most are now dominated by a handful of corporations that coordinate prices and production.
Yeah, they coordinate. He says they coordinate prices and production. I mean, how is this any different than like the crazy conspiracy talk we hear from the Alex Joneses? Like he's talking as if like all these corporations, they just get into a secret room and they're talking, they're fixing prices. When we know, if you referring back to the my video about the USDA actually monitors these companies to see if there's any price fixing, any shady price fixing going on. And what's stopping Robert Reich from organizing a team of activist lawyers to investigate this and maybe find proof and take these companies to court based on antitrust laws?
Not a goddamn thing.
Anyway, before I move on to Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks and their take on inflation, I want to talk about small businesses. Because in previous videos, when other people like Crystal and Sagar and Robert Reich and Kyle Kulinski, when they've tried to blame it on big greedy corporations, I've often brought up the fact that used cars and houses are some of the areas that have been impacted most by inflation and how this does not add up with their little theory. Because as we know, the prices of used cars and houses, they're not exactly set and dictated by some greedy CEO in some boardroom in Manhattan somewhere. Like I've been hearing some stories about how like homeowners, they put their house on the market and they immediately get offers of like 20 to 30% above asking price. You know, when we chalk that up to homeowners, you know, just jacking up prices.
No, of course not.
But according to some stories that I've read, I looked into this. It looks like small businesses have been also increasing prices. This is a story from Market Watch from February 8th of 2022 by Jeffrey Bartash, titled "The Most Small Businesses Since 1974 Are Raising Prices Due to Inflation," according to the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Says the number of small businesses that raised prices on consumers in January rose to a 48-year high, reflecting higher costs of labor and materials amid the biggest surge in U.S. inflation since the early 1980s. The National Federation of Independent Businesses said that a net 61% of small businesses increased prices at the beginning of the year. That's the highest percentage since 1974. And according to another article on CNBC by Eric Rosenbaum, this is from February 14th of 2022, titled "A New Inflation Reading Shows the Small Business Tipping Point Has Been Reached." says, while 74% of small business owners who say they are experiencing rising costs of supplies is virtually unchanged from the fourth quarter of 2021, according to a new CNBC SurveyMonkey small business survey, the number of businesses passing on costs to customers has risen to 47% in the first quarter, up from 39% in the fourth quarter of 2021. And another 32% indicate they will have to raise prices soon if inflation persists. Sticky inflation is their expectation. Over 80% of small business owners expect inflation to still be a problem 6 months from now. 55% say it's very likely. The main concerns about inflation are connected to the small business outlook on the supply chain. The supply chain, keep that in mind. With 75% saying these issues are likely to be a problem 6 months from now. And there is a lack of faith in policymakers, with 71% of small business owners not confident in the Federal Reserve's ability to control inflation. And I suspect this is a reason why a lot of businesses, both big and small, are raising prices now, because a lot of them are investing in labor, and they're making investments now because they don't know what will happen. There's just a lot of uncertainty. They don't know if, especially with Russia going on, who knows what impact that's going to have in the short and long term. But I suspect a lot of businesses are raising prices because they simply don't know what's going to happen within the next 6 to 12 months. There's also another article from the LA Times from December 3rd of 2021 by Margot Roosevelt and Samantha Masunaga, titled Sick of Rising Prices, Your Neighborhood Businesses Are Too. How They're Handling Inflation. Article talks about how skyrocketing inflation is slamming many of California's 1.6 million small businesses, which employ more than half of the state's workforce. Supply chain snafus make it harder and costlier to restock inventory. Workers are seeking higher pay amid a labor shortage, and small firms are less able to navigate the challenges than larger competitors. And it talks about a few examples. There's one example of a dry cleaner, Vivian Bowers, the owner of Bowers & Sons Dry Cleaners. Talks about how the minimum wage increase, how Los Angeles raises minimum wage to $15 an hour in July, hiking her payroll outlay, the cost of hangers, polygarment bags, and solvents, as well as gasoline for the delivery van, have spiraled. In June, Bowers raised her prices by 5%. Well, you know what I think when I see this? I think of a greedy business owner just jacking up prices to squeeze consumers. Now she's worried about having to boost them additional 10%, saying, I don't want to chase away customers. If they had chosen between getting a blazer cleaned or putting gas in their car, which one are they going to do? Going on to say that revenue has been down by a quarter since 2019, saying that the owner is struggling. Article goes on to talk about how a restaurant, Linwood Eatery, about how they've had to raise prices, saying in recent months, Aguilar said that she has seen her wholesale chicken prices rise from 99 cents to $1.50 a pound. Pork is up almost $2 from a buck and a nickel, and 25 pounds of lard used in masa now runs $60 compared to $25 before. As a result, the restaurant boosted what it charges for meat and cheese tamales to $3 from $2, saying if we don't raise our prices, we won't be able to maintain the business. Then it talks about an e-bike store, talking about how global supply chain snarls have delayed deliveries of Chinese batteries to Padago's Vietnam factory. Shipping costs rose from $4,000 per container to $20,000. The company, which delivers bikes to 200 dealerships, says it has probably 8,000 bikes in the water right now between Asia and here. So it does sound like supply chains are having a large impact here. Then there's an auto repair shop. Hagup Barbarian, the owner of All Right Automotive in Inglewood, talks about how this is ridiculous. Everything is going up, even the simplest parts. I was paying 75 cents for a light bulb. Now it's $1.25. Recently, a customer came in to replace a tire. The same tire that Barbarian had sold him 6 months earlier had risen from $65 to $85 wholesale. The owner saying, I was not going to charge him $20 more, saying that I'm a 5-star shop and I don't want him to feel cheated, so I only charged him $10 more. So as we can see, this is impacting not only used cars, not only housing prices, it's also impacting a lot of small businesses whose prices are not controlled by some greedy corporation, by a CEO who's just looking to make a little more money on his paycheck. Which brings us to Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks. Here's the video. It's from February 15th of 2022. As you can see, this video has almost 66,000 views. The Young Turks has over 5 million subscribers on YouTube. What are they saying about inflation?
Bernie Sanders has a beef with Chipotle. No, not the taste of the burritos or the ingredients, but it has to do with profit gouging.
Yeah, profit gouging.
The fast food chain recently reported its fourth quarter numbers, and last year its total revenue increased 22% to $2 billion. Good for the company. However, it's not because of a record number of customers. It's because Chipotle was jacking up the prices.
They're jacking up the prices.
And holding some costs down. Bernie Sanders just tweeted, corporate greed is Chipotle increasing its profits by 181% last year to $764 million, giving its CEO a 137% pay raise to $38 million in 2020, and blaming the rising cost of a burrito on a minimum wage worker who got a 50-cent pay raise. That's not inflation, that is price gouging. And the evidence of price gouging actually does seem pretty compelling when you look at
Seems pretty compelling.
Some of what has been reported on this. CEO Brian Niccol made $38 million in 2020. Niccol's compensation was 2,898 times more than the median Chipotle's worker, 13,120.
Yeah, notice how they're establishing the goalposts here, especially with on the employee pay. Oh, we're basing this off of a 25-hour work week in fucking Illinois.
$7 salary in 2020 based on an employee working 25 hours a week in Illinois. When the fourth quarter earnings report was released, Niccol said in an accompanying statement that 2021 was an outstanding year for Chipotle, highlighting the strength and resilience of our brand. Niccol, though, was not commenting or responding to Bernie Sanders' criticism or the main allegation that Chipotle took advantage of inflation, took advantage of the pandemic to make prices rise a lot faster than inflation was rising. Cenk, your thoughts?
Yeah, so first of all, Bernie's making a terrific point about
Bernie never makes a terrific point, let's be real. And when he does, it's probably by accident.
Who's actually responsible for rising prices.
Who's actually responsible?
Second of all, I want to make clear, as I always do, look, there's nothing wrong with a company getting bigger. There's nothing wrong with a company making a lot of profits.
But
the CEO to wager, median wage is an issue. But overall, if your company's doing
now, what's the issue with that? What does it mean? Why does that matter? Why does the ratio matter? I'll get to that in a second.
Great, and you want to pay your CEO a lot of money? No problem. Okay. So where do we draw the line? We draw the line when you say, oh, we had to raise the price of the burrito, and it's the worker's fault.
I don't think they're saying it's the workers' fault. I think they want to hire more workers. A lot of this has to do with expansion from what I've read about it. They're expanding. They want to hire more workers, and they're offering competitive rates.
They're making too much when their median wages, as we just showed you, is a little over $13,000 a year.
Yeah, based on like what, a worker in Illinois?
Okay, but the guy making $38 million a year is not making too much. And he's not contributing to inflation,
All right, so let's talk about this. We got to talk about this. I brought this up when I talked about Starbucks in my last video about inflation. But if you look at the CEO's compensation of Chipotle, most of what they get paid in, roughly $29 million of that is from stock options. So it's not like he's sucking this $38 million from the company revenue or the company's profits to put in his own pocket. It's from stock option. But even if the CEO was paid in, say, $38 million in cash, someone brought this up on my last video in the comments, and I was mad I didn't make this point because I've actually made this point before. If you were to take that $38 million, just say it's pure cash, and you were to split it up between Chipotle's roughly 88 to 96,000 employees, depending on which source you read, that would give each employee roughly $400 for the entire year. It's not that significant of a pay increase. In fact, according to some stories on CNBC, Chipotle is spending roughly $2 billion a year on labor. This is a story from October of 2021. So it's not like that $38 million could have, we know that the $38 million would not have been enough to give all the employees, all 90,000 of them, a significant pay increase. But he's also trying to explain this away with inflation. When we saw that, if you actually look at Chipotle's numbers, they make about $7.54 billion in revenue sales. That's sales to customers. That's based on all the soda, all the burritos that they sell to customers, if we're just counting revenue. And so if you were to just take $38 million in cash, that would, and you were just to tell the CEO to essentially work for free so that you can prevent raising prices significantly, you would only be able to lower prices by less than 1%. I think it would be 0.5% of a difference. And even if you were to do it on profits, I think it would be a 5% difference. But again, this is kind of besides the point because the CEO does not get paid in cash. It's not like he's siphoning cash from the revenue and the profits. This is a lot of context that the people at the Young Turks conveniently leave out.
Golly gee, there was nothing they could do. No, wait a minute. Okay, you got $2 billion in revenue, but you could have $2 billion in revenue and
$2 billion in revenue,
lose money, and then I say, okay, well, they're struggling and they don't have the margins. I understand it. I'm a business person, right?
Yeah, he's a business guy.
But wait a minute, you made $764 million in profits last year, and then you bragged about it. So don't come around telling us that the wages of the average guy is too high, and that's why you had to raise prices. No, that's deeply insulting. It's deeply wrong, like factually incorrect. And look,
yeah. So again, if the CEO just worked for free, it would, even if it were just straight cash, it would barely make a difference in the prices.
Bernie happened to pick Chipotle, but I funny enough, I have no beef with Chipotle. It's a trend, and I'm not letting them off the hook either. It's a trend that they're all doing.
They're all doing it.
And when we showed this to you weeks and months ago, all the news anchors, or as I call them, the news actors on cable.
Yeah, news actors.
Came out, inflation, the prices are too high. We showed you a number of clips, including from MSNBC, where anchors would tell you wages are too high. That's why inflation is going up, and it's, this endangers their beloved stock market.
And this is also amusing when you remember that just a few years ago, when TYT was doing a story about Los Angeles raising its minimum wage to $15 an hour, as I just covered, has had an impact on small businesses, forcing them to raise prices.
No surprise there.
This is what they were saying on TYT back in 2015.
Look, I think that is going to happen someday, but not very soon. And yes, that is what many of those on the opposite side of this will say, that people are going to have to shed jobs or shed hours because of it.
Let me tell you something. Or you could charge another $1 for a hamburger.
Or more likely another 5 cents for a hamburger.
Yes.
More likely.
Yeah, I mentioned this on my previous video about inflation, about how for years you had a lot of people, a lot of the minimum wage warriors, talking about how, oh, I would be willing to pay an extra 50 cents for a cheeseburger. I'd be willing to pay an extra $1 if I knew that the workers were getting paid a living wage. Now, you might be able to say, well, this wasn't Cenk Uygur, this was Jimmy Dore, and they've since burned bridges, so aren't you? But does that really matter? I mean, this is how the TYT people, this is how they talk about things like raising taxes. Always talking about, oh yeah, go ahead, raise my taxes. I love paying more taxes if I know it's going to go build more schools, fund more schools, make sure everyone's getting access to health care. If I know it's going to help struggling families. Same difference. Yeah, go ahead and raise the minimum wage to 15. I don't mind paying more for a cheeseburger or a burrito if I know that the worker's getting paid a living wage. And then when it happens, they get all mad about, how dare you pass that cost on to the consumer? Meanwhile, you have Cenk Uygur back in December. He did a video about how California might raise it to $18. Guy looks like he just guy looks like he's fucking opening presents on Christmas. You gotta wonder, like, what's really going on here? Because you would think that all of these economic fascists, formerly known as progressives, you think they would love all of these corporations who are raising wages beyond what they think is a living wage, even though they're passing on the cost to the consumers. They've been saying it's going to be great for the economy. It's great morally. And you got to wonder if part of the reason why they're mad is because they don't get to take credit for it. Because corporations, they're doing it on their own volition. Corporations like Starbucks, Chipotle, they're not doing it with Cenk Uygur's heroes pointing the government's gun at their heads and telling them how to pay their employees. Or maybe this is just what altruism does to your thinking. Because when sacrificing for the less fortunate, the meek, the weak, the poor, when that's the standard for morality, there's no end to it. They're not happy that people are getting paid more. They're mad that the so-called rich, the CEOs, the big corporations, they're upset that they're not suffering enough.
Market itself.
At least in my opinion.
So let me give you more examples. McDonald's, last year they had $23 billion in revenue. But again, revenue means you're a giant company, but did you actually make a profit? Yeah, only $7.5 billion.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
In profit last year, and their profits went up 59%. That's a monster number.
See what he's doing here? He's saying, look, they made a 59% increase in profits. You know, so they're just jacking up prices so that they can increase their profits, you guys. And again, what Cenk Uygur is leaving out here, this is the McDonald's net income. In 2020, like a lot of companies, this was a bad year for McDonald's. They had a 21.5% decline from 2019. And yeah, they had a 59% increase, so it looks like they had a bad year. And now 2021, that was their bounce back year. Bounce back to somewhat normal. And Cenk is framing this to make it sound like, oh, the 60% in profits, that's because they're jacking up prices.
In any context. So don't tell us that you had to increase the prices and that it's the workers' fault. That's insane.
And it's not just McDonald's, it's not just Chipotle, a group, which is a watchdog group called Food and Water Watch. They pointed out that over the last 2 years since the pandemic, the consumer price index has gone up 8.5%. However, energy costs have increased by 20%.
Yeah, energy costs. I wonder, I don't watch enough Young Turks, but I'm guessing they, like Robert Reich, they were They were crusading against fossil fuel energy, calling for the closure of coal power plants. I know they hate Joe Manchin. They're always accusing him of being bought off by the coal lobby. And now that we have less fossil fuels, prices are going up. Now they're all upset.
The cost.
Of course, they'd probably say something like, oh, well, only if we invested more in stuff like wind. And so we've been doing that for a fucking decade, you clowns. How is that working out? The state and federal governments have been spending tens of billions of dollars over the last decade. We have more wind power, more solar power. Yet energy prices keep going. It's almost like these energy sources are not reliable.
To feed a family of 4 on a thrifty food plan has increased by 33.5%. So what's going on?
If anyone's responsible for price increases in energy, it's people like Robert Reich, Cenk Uygur, presumably David Schuster.
On here, well, let's look at some individual products. Gasoline over the last 2 years, up 31%. Beef, up 19%. Pork, up 31%. Poultry, up nearly...
Now, think about this, because this plays into McDonald's and Chipotle. These are large companies. They have a lot of locations that they have to move products to. So if price of gasoline goes up, price of business goes up for those companies. And they are in the business of selling food, selling meat in their products. So if the price of beef and pork and whatnot, if they're going up, are companies like McDonald's and Chipotle, are they just supposed to absorb those costs, absorb increased costs in labor? Oh, well, I don't have a problem with making profit. Well, then what? What, huh?
20%, milk up 17%, eggs 16.5%. Why is it that prices are going up so much faster than the 8% of the CPI? Well, that's because these companies are raising prices. It doesn't have anything to do with the supply chain. It has
nothing to do with the supply chain, even though I talked a lot about how the small businesses are also raising prices, not greedy corporations, but small businesses. They're raising prices largely due to supply chain issues.
Have anything to do with inflation. They are taking advantage of this opportunity. And oh, by the way, their revenue is skyrocketing.
Revenue, huh? You see what's going on here?
Meat and chicken producers, Tyson's Foods, over the last 2 years.
Now they're counting revenue.
Their revenue has gone up 11%. Purdue, up 12.7%. Cargill, up 17.3%. And how about the grocery stores? That there are 4 of them that own 70% of all the grocery stores across the United States. Walmart, up 6.7% compared to...
Yeah, notice how he's using revenue. Also, you have to consider what I just said about fast food pertaining to the grocery stores. They sell a lot of meat. They rely heavily on trucks bringing them products. So if cost of fuel goes up, cost of business goes up, are these companies just supposed to eat these costs?
Fiscal year 2019.
But it's interesting that he's using revenue numbers and not profit numbers, because if we look at some of these companies, like Kroger, this is their net income. You look at their quarterly. It looks like they're actually down from 2020. Their net income, net income is company's net profit or loss after all revenues, income items, and expenses have been accounted. Looks like Kroger's pretty down in 2021. Similar thing with Walmart. This is their reports. Looks like they've been pretty steady. They took a hit in 2020, it looks like, and then they've since come back up. It looks like 2020 was actually a good year for them, too. Looks like their best years were in 2011, between 2013. That's probably before Amazon started giving them a little bit of competition. But you don't notice like a significant increase, a significant spike in profits. Same with Costco. Costco seems to have been on an upward trajectory. I guess this is my way of saying, if you notice the difference between these 3 companies and their charts, they're all kind of different. I don't think it's really fair to paint a broad brush with all of them. But Costco, I mean, it's worth noting that this is another one of these companies that's often been applauded by the economic fascists, formerly known as progressives, because they've always paid their workers $16+ an hour plus benefits. But again, what David Schuster is doing here, he's counting revenue.
Kroger up 8.4%. Costco, Their revenue has gone up 28.3% over the last 2 years compared to pre-pandemic levels.
And especially if you look at Kroger's pre-tax profit margins, this isn't the same. This is another thing where it just kind of varies company to company. But their pre-tax profit margins are really low. It's like 0.9% in the third quarter of 2021. And this is pre-tax. I think this is important considering that President jibber-jabbering Joe Biden at the State of the Union the other day tried to throw greedy corporations under the bus, begging them to give their workers raises without passing it on to the consumers. Also pay more in taxes. I don't know how paying more in taxes magically makes prices go down. That's probably because it does not. Also, try to buy American. I feel like this goes against their whole we need competition. They want it both ways. Buy American, but also we got to frown upon competition from overseas.
Albertsons up 11.6. So clearly there are a lot of companies in the food sector and the energy sector which are taking advantage of people's troubles and using the excuse of inflation and supply chain issues, whatever.
Yeah, supply chain issues.
Those are, and saying,
whenever those are, yeah, we're not having problems. It's not like we have backups in the ports in California.
We have to raise prices, and they're making record profits.
They're making record profits. So he used revenue numbers to suggest that these companies are making record profits. Some of them are, but a lot of them are also not. And I just think it's amazing to see that a year ago, Robert Reich, who was accusing corporations, conservatives of fear-mongering, making a boogeyman out of inflation. And now that prices are up, Robert Reich is blaming the corporations he accused of fear-mongering in the first place.
What an asshole!
Years ago, Robert Reich was saying how wonderful raising the minimum wage would be for the economy, dismissing concerns of price increases. Now he's mad that corporations are doing the thing that he wanted the government to force them to do in the first place. The Young Turks have been talking about how they'd be willing to pay a little extra for a cheeseburger if it means that workers are getting a living wage. Now they're mad that corporations are increasing prices to pay their workers more. You have Robert Reich, people like Jank and David Schuster. They're all trying to throw random, large, out-of-context numbers and stats at you in a sad attempt to scapegoat corporations, even though it's impacting small businesses and used cars and houses. Again, all areas where prices are not set by some rich CEO in a boardroom somewhere in Manhattan or downtown Chicago or wherever. And they're hoping, the David Schusters, the Robert Reiches, the Cenk Uygurs, they're hoping you won't notice their smoke and mirrors. They're hoping you won't notice their trickery. And you know what? Hopefully, now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!